Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us today for the very first episode of the John Delgado Show. Joining us today is Jody Plauché, who's here to discuss a subject that I think is very important to parents in our city, and that's the issue of sexual abuse. We're going to discuss that topic and also talk about the resources that are available to victims in this city. And this has obviously been in the news lately with the Sandusky scandal in Pennsylvania. Jody Plauché is joining us today. Jody, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself
Well, the topic is very personal to me because I was a child victim of sexual abuse when I was younger. I was molested by my karate teacher. I'd been taking karate for over a year, and he eventually kidnapped me. That's how it became public, and I disclosed. And my father, in a case that goes back to 1984, shot him and killed him in the Baton Rouge airport.
Okay, and you were born and raised in Baton Rouge, right?
From Baton Rouge. I was born at the Old Women's Hospital. Grew up here, went to Woodlawn High School, and I graduated from LSU.
Now, you said that you were kidnapped by your karate teacher. How did that begin? How did you meet this person? How did that relationship start?
Fifth grade, elementary school. I was always active in sports. I played football, basketball, baseball, and soccer. I would leave football games at halftime to go to my soccer games. So I already had athletics in my life. Well, my little brother, he didn't. So my mother thought it would be a good idea to put him in karate. So she put him, me, and my older brother and another family friend in karate. And eventually that led to us taking karate from a man named Jeff Doucette. And we took karate for him for about a year before he kidnapped me.
And how did that relationship change from one of a coach or instructor to one of a victimizer?
Well, unfortunately, pedophiles are really good at what they do. And you hear the topic called grooming. Basically, it's where the perpetrator gains the trust of the family. And so they come across as a great guy. We're taking karate probably about after a month and a half, 2 months after taking karate, Jeff told my mother, he said, look, I got this fighting team. We travel around. We fight in tournaments, kind of like the Karate Kid. He fought in a tournament. We travel around, we fight in tournaments, and normally we got a tournament in New Orleans this weekend, and before we go to a tournament, we'll go out for pizza and to a movie. So he asked if we could go see a movie, and it was the movie They Call Me Bruce. And my mother called her brother, who worked for the sheriff's department, and said, look, can you run a background check on this guy, make sure that he's okay? And my uncle came back and said, yeah, he's fine, just a couple traffic tickets. And she ended up letting us go. He took us, we went to Chuck E. Cheese after where my cousin was having a birthday party. And it was like, oh man, this guy's really nice. So eventually we went to karate tournaments. And at this time, nothing inappropriate's going on. So it's just like we went to Astroworld, and it's like, man, we were having so much fun taking karate, traveling to tournaments.
And everybody's all the while is thinking that he's a great guy.
He's a great guy. I mean, he would say, hey, look, you know what? I'll take him home from karate practices. This would have been February 1983. He said, hey, look, you know what? When my mother dropped us off to karate practice, he said, look, I'll drop him off. So we're coming back, and he had a 280ZX. It was what his girlfriend's car. I mean, we later found out it wasn't his girlfriend. But so he said, all right, we all wanted to drive the 280ZX. It was standard, and we can make it go fast. So this is when he first started basically what's known as testing the boundaries of the child. What a perpetrator will do is they'll test the child's boundary. They'll do something that's kind of like tickling. Think about when you were 15 and you were on a date and you're tickling, and it's just so you can get closer so you can move in and make a kiss because you feel uncomfortable. So what he did was he let me sit on his lap to drive the car, and all of a sudden he put his hands in my lap, and I'm sitting here driving the car, and I'm like, whoa, what's going on? And then it went away. It was just enough to where he was testing to see my reaction. If I would have been like, whoa, move your hands, he probably would have left me alone and moved on to another kid.
And how old were you at this time?
I was 10 years old.
How long did it take to go from that boundary testing until you actually were being physically abused?
Well, I think a lot of people would say that boundary testing would be abuse, but if you're talking about when it turned into a full-on sexual relationship, it was gradual. And I think a lot of it would have to do to the access. I was taking karate probably once, twice, 3 times a week, and so his access was limited than, say, like maybe a stepfather would have more access because he's there on a day-to-day basis. So He started the inappropriate boundary testing in February. Then I remember in March went on a crawfishing trip, and we got a hotel room, and that particular night is probably the one where I passed the test, unfortunately. He basically put his hand down my pants while I slept. While I wasn't sleeping, I was pretending to be sleeping, and he did that all night long. And I think that's when he knew he could go to the next level. And it was on a trip in Houston in April when he advanced that. And then it was another time in May where basically you could go and do the rape kit and get a positive result.
And how long did the sexual abuse go on in your case?
Well, the boundaries started testing the boundaries in February. It gradually turned into a full-blown sexual relationship in May. And it wasn't, he kidnapped me in February. Tomorrow, today's the 18th of February, tomorrow will be the 19th. Tomorrow will mark the 29th anniversary of when he took me to Port Arthur, Texas, to his mom's house. He got money to get a bus ticket, and then we rode a bus from Orange, Texas to Los Angeles, California.
And all this while that the sexual abuse was going on, no one was aware of what was happening to you?
I don't think so. I hope not, because hopefully it would have said something. I think there were flags raised by people outside of our inner circle, the people who weren't groomed. Like when you took a karate trip to Dallas, and my uncle was like, "Man, that guy doesn't seem right." But my parents was like, "Oh, you don't know Jeff. He's a good guy." And so he kind of had something. But well, then we never saw my uncle again, or Jeff was never around my uncle again. So it really wasn't something that they could follow up on. I think I had a couple other family members that really didn't like Jeff. They didn't really know what it was about him that they didn't like. And so they probably weren't surprised when they found out what happened. But as for going, you know what, I think he's, having sex with Jody, no, I don't think anyone had a clue.
Now, you said you were kidnapped. You went to Port Arthur, Texas, and then to California. And I think this story is familiar to a lot of people who've been in Baton Rouge for a long time. But for those who may be new to our city or maybe a little bit younger, weren't around when this happened to you, can you tell us a little bit about what happened with the kidnapping?
Well, he was facing charges. He had, I want to say, like embezzled money and wrote bad checks, and so he was going up to where he had to go to court. So he was skipping town to avoid prosecution. So his first charge that they were going to charge him with was unlawful or lawful, something to avoid prosecution. Well, because I was his partner, so to say, he didn't want to go alone, so he took me with him. Well, then that was kidnapping. Once we got to California, we basically settled in a motel room in Anaheim, a block from Disneyland, and he allowed me after a week to call home to my mother and let her know that I was okay. And I called up, I said, "Hey, I'm okay," and she was like, "All right." Well, in a phone conversation with her, he made a threat that said something like, if you don't meet me in New York, because he was trying to say we were in New York, but we were really in California, then you'll never see Jody alive. Well, when that happened, then the charge would have been aggravated kidnapping.
I see. And how did the police finally find y'all?
He allowed me to call home, and I don't know that it wasn't intentional. Like I don't know that he wasn't ready to be caught, because I think he only had like $2 or $6 in his pocket when he allowed this to happen. I called home, collect. Okay, if you're a kidnapper, I mean, not to give kidnapping advice, but don't allow people to call collect. Which I don't even think they have collect anymore, because everyone has cell phones. But back then you would call collect if you were calling long distance, if you didn't have any money. And you'd ask the person who was my mother if she would pay for the phone call. Well, she said yeah, but she asked the operator for time and charges, which means after we hung up, the operator would come back on to my mother and say that call was 48 minutes and it's going to be $97. So once I called collect and hung up, then Mike Burnett was at the house. He was with the sheriff's office. And he told the woman, he said, "Look, I'm investigating a kidnapping. I need to know where that call came from." And then they contacted FBI and the Anaheim police, and then they came over. And probably about 30 minutes later, they came busting into the motel room. And he was actually on the phone talking to my mother. And when they busted in, he set the phone down. And the police officer walked over and hung up the phone. So they didn't, my mother's like, "Did you get Jody?" Because he had told my mother that I was off at a neighbor's, because he said we were at an apartment. And that I was at some neighbor's house, and that if the cops came to get him, she wouldn't find Jody because he wasn't going to tell. So there was about a 30-minute window where she didn't know that they had actually got me.
And all of these lies that he was telling your mother, I want you to maybe give some parents some advice here. Obviously he lied to your family for years, and for at least
from the time we knew him.
From the time you knew him. Were there any things that they could have seen that they just didn't? Were there any clues that should have given him away that maybe weren't observed?
I would have said no probably a couple of years ago, but I think that there are patterns of behavior. For one, I withdrew. I didn't do it intentionally. He kind of made me. He was almost like an abusive partner. He didn't want me to talk to my dad. He'd get jealous of my dad. You know, you're spending time with him, you love him more than me. I had to quit all the sports I was involved in. I quit soccer, football, basketball, baseball. He made me quit all that. So just the change in my personality, kind of being withdrawn. I was okay at school because I was away from him, but spending too much time, if a grown man wants to spend too much time with young kids, that should be a red flag too. So I think that if you were educated, in 1984, my parents didn't really have a clue, but if you're educated, there are signs that you look for. If someone seems too good to be true, they probably are.
The jealousy that you mentioned was one of those things that I saw when I saw the Jerry Sandusky stories in the news. That's one of those things that struck me, and you've made that mention a couple of times, that it was almost like being in a relationship. I know that's kind of hard for people to hear, but can you just expand on that a little bit?
Well, I think the whole jealousy was a control factor. I think it was a way of him, you know, they say, oh, well, you know, rape and sexual abuse is about power and control. As far as pedophilia, I think it's a little different. I think pedophiles, their attraction is children. You know, us in karate uniforms was like me being at Hooters watching the Hooter girls walk around, you know. So he's looking at us going, oh, look at the kids. But he used that control, that jealousy, the manipulation to protect himself from me telling on him. That was one of his things. I didn't tell on him, not because I didn't like what he was doing. I didn't like it, but I didn't want the drama that was going to come with it. I didn't want my dad to shoot him. I figured he would, and that's exactly what happened. So there's a term, compliant, or you know, what was the
willing victim?
Willing victim. I wasn't a willing victim, but I willingly chose not to disclose because I thought being quiet was probably the easiest thing to do.
It's very scary, Jody. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to move on to our next guest, which is Kristen Ramey, who's going to discuss the services that are available in our city to victims of sexual abuse, and she's going to be joining us after the break. Thank you. Thank you, Jody.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Joining us now is Kristen Ramey. She is a Victims Assistance Coordinator with the 19th Judicial District Court DA's office. Welcome, Kristen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Kristen, tell the audience, what is a Victims Assistance Coordinator? What does that job do?
What our job entails is we act as an advocate, as a liaison for the victims that come through our office. Every day we are talking to victims' families and explaining the process. We are advocating on their behalf, making sure that they are given every single right that is given to them. We are making sure that they are kept up to date with what's going on with their case. A lot of times with either the lack of communication between either there's no phone numbers available, we're out there trying to make sure that these families are kept up to date with the court process.
And you work for the District Attorney's Office?
Yes, with Mr. Hiller Moore.
All right, and how long has this program been available?
It started when he was elected into office. This is something that he wanted to concentrate on. He wanted to make sure that victims were, they had their rights, that they were kept up to date with what's going on, involved in the court process. And
give us an example. Let's take, and I don't want to, obviously we don't want to pick a real life victim here, but let's say that someone like Jody would come to y'all's office. There's been an allegation made of sexual abuse. How does that process work from your perspective?
Well, first we would bring the family in, bring the victim in, and have a conversation with them. Just generally just go over our role, what we do, what we will be providing them, and see what their needs are. We want to start off, to make them feel as comfortable as possible and to help build that rapport with them and know that they can trust us and call us anytime they have questions. And if there's counseling that they need, we will look for that resource for them. We do a lot of referring to either our local Capital Area Family Violence Intervention Center, our sexual assault counseling centers, or even crime victims reparations. A lot of times victims have financial needs that need to be met, whether it's paying medical bills, whether it's paying for the counseling that they can't afford. We refer them out to those things as well.
And so once a case enters prosecution, so that the district attorney is satisfied that there's been enough of an allegation that's a real case, and they're going to go forward with it, how often do you have contact with the victim? We
will contact that victim as much as possible. It depends. Each case is an individual. We handle individually. For instance, for our sexual assault cases, we will probably stay in closer contact. We just want to make sure that they're feeling comfortable, that they can trust us. For some of our homicide cases where you have the family of the victim that's been murdered, we will contact them maybe every 2 months. We let them know what's going on with the case, but we're also just checking on that family, to let them know that they're not forgotten, that their loved one is not just another case to us, that we actually care, and we are here to fight for you. So as the victim assistance coordinators, our job is to just make sure that these families know that they are going to be treated with the utmost dignity and respect, and that they are thought of every day. A day doesn't go by that we don't think about our families that we see and come through our office.
And some of these cases, like a kidnapping case, can take a long time to come to trial.
Yes, we have seen some cases take over 2 years and more, and it is frustrating for those family members, and we have to sit there and explain to them why this court date has been pushed back, why this has been done, and we understand their frustration, and we want them to know that we're fighting just as hard. Sometimes it's things that it's not up to us why they get pushed back, and sometimes they understand. Sometimes it's upsetting. So,
what about after a case has gone to trial and hopefully there's been a successful verdict, in the case? What does your office do in terms of post-conviction, post-trial help to these victims?
We try to stay in contact. What we have now going on is what we consider every year Victims Awareness Week. And we stay in contact with those families. We invite them back. It's in April, so we'll be having that coming up soon. This April, it's the week of April 22nd. And sometimes we invite a speaker to come and speak on their behalf of what they just went through and kind of, tell their story. Whether it's a family member or the victim itself, we make sure that they are kept up to date with what's going on in the community. If there's any other awareness programs going on for victims' rights and things like that, so we kind of send them things out, newsletters, or just little notes that say, "Hey, we're still thinking of you. Hope you're doing okay." So.
And I'm sure for a lot of people who have gone through something like this, that they want